I heard my sister calling me. But she wasn't home. I live in a house with my sister, a 2-floor, mother-daughter style home. It's essentially 2 separate living spaces under one roof, each with its own kitchen. My sister lives downstairs, and I live upstairs. She isn't home very often. Most nights, she stays with her boyfriend, who lives about 20 miles away. I'm 30 years old, and realistically, being home alone shouldn't bother me at this point in my life. But if I'm being honest, sometimes it still does. This happened on a night when I was completely alone upstairs, sitting in my living room and watching a scary movie. My part of the house has an open layout. The living room, dining room, and kitchen are all one large space with no walls separating them. My couch sits right in the middle of that space, which means that while I'm watching TV, a large portion of the room is directly behind me. In the dark, that setup isn't exactly comforting. The only light in the room was coming from the TV, flickering shadows across the walls and furniture. As the movie played, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting something to be there. I like to think I'm not the only 30-year-old guy who still does that, but I'll admit, it made the atmosphere worse. Eventually, the movie ended. I brushed my teeth, turned off all the lights in the house, and went to bed. I slept for about 2 hours. Around 1 a.m., I suddenly woke up. At first, I didn't know why. I was still half asleep, disoriented, staring into the darkness of my bedroom. Then I heard it, a voice. It was coming from downstairs. It sounded exactly like my sister. It didn't sound like she was outside calling for me to open the door. It sounded like she was already inside the house, yelling up toward me. I couldn't fully understand what she was saying at first, but there was no doubt in my mind, it was her voice. Still groggy and not thinking clearly, I assumed she must have come home unexpectedly. Maybe she was arguing with her boyfriend. Maybe she needed something. I got out of bed and stepped into the pitch-black hallway. I flipped on the hallway light and made my way toward the living room. As I walked, I heard her voice again, clearer this time. She was saying my name. I started heading downstairs, calling back to her, asking what she wanted. The downstairs was completely dark. I reached the foyer and tried to find the light switch, but my hands fumbled uselessly along the wall. I wasn't exaggerating when I say I was groggy as hell. I walked down her short hallway toward the kitchen and finally found a switch. When I flipped it on, the kitchen light slowly came to life, dim at first before gradually brightening. The light spilled into her living room, illuminating her entire downstairs apartment, and there was no one there, not my sister, not her boyfriend. The rooms were empty. My heart started to race. I checked her bedroom next. It was empty too. I called her name loudly, once, hoping she'd answer from somewhere I hadn't checked. Nothing. Then, just moments after I yelled her name, I heard something drop onto the floor inside her bedroom. The sound was clear and unmistakable. I had just been in that room. There was no one there. I didn't investigate further. Panic took over. I rushed back upstairs like a scared kid, went straight to my bedroom, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking as I tried calling her over and over. She didn't answer. I sat there, locked in my room, trying to convince myself that I had hallucinated everything. Eventually, exhaustion got the better of me, and I fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up to a text from my sister. She asked why I had called her at 1 a.m. I asked her if she had been home at all the night before. She told me no, she had stayed at her boyfriend's house the entire night. Later, I went downstairs and checked her bedroom again, trying to figure out what could have made that sound. There wasn't a single object on the floor that could explain it. Nothing was out of place. I want to believe I hallucinated everything I heard that night. I need to believe that, because the alternative is far more disturbing. I've never hallucinated before. I don't have sleep disorders. I've never experienced anything like that again, but the way I heard my sister's voice so clearly, and the sound of something falling in an empty room, that's what still freaks me out. It all started on a quiet autumn evening. I had just moved into my grandmother's old house, an inherited two-story structure tucked away at the end of a narrow street. The kind of street where the streetlights flicker and the wind whispers through the trees, making the shadows dance on the walls. I was alone, my parents were visiting relatives in another state, and my older brother was away at college. At 22, I thought I was ready to live alone, to enjoy my first taste of freedom. But I had no idea how wrong I was. The house had always felt strange, even when I was a child visiting my grandmother. There were rooms I was told never to enter, hallways where my footsteps seemed to echo long after I had walked past. And an attic filled with old furniture covered in dusty sheets. My grandmother had passed away a few months earlier, and I was now the sole occupant. The first night, I unpacked, set up my room, and tried to settle in. I remember turning on the lights and feeling a chill that wasn't just from the fall air. It was something heavier, deeper, as if the house itself was aware of my presence. Around midnight, I decided to watch a movie to distract myself from the quiet. I picked a thriller, ironic in hindsight, and sat on the couch in the living room, which had an open layout, so the kitchen and dining area were all in view. The shadows behind me seemed to stretch unnaturally. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder too many times, telling myself it was just paranoia. Around 1:30 a.m., the movie ended. I brushed my teeth, turned off all the lights, and tried to sleep. About 2 hours later, I woke up suddenly. At first, I couldn't figure out why, but then I heard a faint sound coming from the hallway, like a soft whisper. I thought it might be the wind, or perhaps an old pipe settling, but then I heard it again, a clear, low voice calling my name. I froze. I slowly got out of bed and switched on the hallway light. The house was still, and the shadows were long and dark. The voice came again, clearer this time, and it seemed to come from the living room downstairs. My heart raced as I remembered the stories my grandmother used to tell about the house, that sometimes it held echoes of the past. Shadows of people who had lived and died there. But this was different. It was insistent, almost urgent. I cautiously made my way down the stairs, whispering, "Who's there?" No answer, just the soft creak of the floor beneath my feet. I reached the living room and flicked on the lights. Everything appeared normal, empty. But then I saw it, a chair slightly moved from its usual spot, as if someone had been sitting there very recently. I called out again, louder this time, but only silence responded. I returned to my bedroom, convinced I was imagining things. But the feeling didn't leave me. The whispers grew into footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the attic. I had never gone up there. My grandmother always warned me, saying that room kept its memories. My curiosity overcame my fear, and I decided to check. As I approached the attic door, the footsteps stopped abruptly. My hand shook as I turned the knob and slowly pushed the door open. The attic was dark, filled with cobweb-covered furniture and boxes. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness. Then I saw it, movement at the far end. A figure, barely visible, crouched among the old furniture. It wasn't fully formed, more like a shadow, but its presence was palpable, oppressive. I felt my stomach churn and my blood run cold. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The shadow didn't answer but moved slightly, as if acknowledging my presence. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot. Then I heard another sound, distinct from the shadow, a soft laugh, human, coming from downstairs. Someone was actually in the house. I ran to the stairs and called 911, but the line was dead, cut off. I grabbed the heaviest object nearby, a brass lamp, and crept down. The shadow seemed to move with me, floating along the walls as I descended, its form twisting and stretching unnaturally. Then I saw him, a man, average build, dressed in dark clothes, crouching in the hallway near the kitchen. His face was obscured, but I could see the malicious intent in his eyes. I realized he must have been watching me for hours, maybe even since I arrived. My heart pounded as I lifted the lamp, ready to strike. He heard me, turned toward me, and froze for a second, then laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh, it was hollow, sharp, and echoed unnaturally, like the shadow had lent it voice. I swung the lamp, hitting him in the shoulder, and he stumbled back. I ran toward the front door, but it was locked. Someone had locked it from the inside. I realized then that the shadow and the man were somehow connected. Every time the man moved, the shadow flickered along the walls, dancing and twisting in impossible ways. I ran back to my room, locking the door and barricading it with furniture. I could hear him moving through the house, whispering my name, calling me toward him. And then, I felt it, a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, swinging the lamp wildly. Nothing. The shadow was there, merging with the darkness. The man laughed again, but now his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding me. Hours passed. I don't know how long I stayed awake, listening to the whispers, the footsteps, the laughter.